Hey everybody, and welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Caesar Marches on Rome by Historia Civilis. So, we have seen the build-up to this point. We've witnessed the rising political tensions within Rome itself, Caesar's increasing ambitions as he drifts further from the other members of the triumvirate. And last time we saw Caesar cross the Rubicon. Now he is advancing through the Italian peninsula, drawing ever closer to Rome itself. Very excited to see where this one goes. So if you guys end up enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon, which is linked down below. And without any further ado, let's jump into this reaction.
In 49 BCE, a provincial governor named Julius Caesar led an armed insurrection against the Senate and people of Rome. He commanded 10 legions, which was a lot, and although they remained personally loyal to him, most of them were hunkered down all the way up in Gaul for the winter.
Yeah, and we have seen the development of that personal loyalty over time due partially to Caesar's successes on the battlefield. I mean, that is a good way to create loyalty from men to their commander, but also the way that Caesar will go back for men. He will try to save them. He will give them what they are due. And he's a man who makes big promises. So that sort of loyalty, not just to the Roman state or the Roman Senate, but to Caesar himself, has been building over time.
Only one, the 13th Legion, was in any position to be of use in the short term. At half strength, the 13th consisted of approximately 2,500 soldiers, and the moment these soldiers crossed into Italy, it amounted to a declaration of war.
Yeah.
Way up in Gaul, Caesar's close friend and right-hand man Labienus had been left in charge of Caesar's legions in his absence. Labienus knew that there was a political back and forth going on in the south, but assumed that everything would be fine. Well, everything was not fine.
Yeah, everything very much was not fine. Everything's about to explode in a rather unprecedented way. But Labienus, yes, he is Caesar's right-hand man. I mean, he has been extremely reliable up until this point. If Caesar was to send one man to do his work, it would be Labienus. Perhaps at this point, the only person Caesar could trust to do things in his stead, his most talented and trusted subordinate.
When negotiations broke down, news started trickling in that Caesar had risen up in open rebellion and was in the process of marching on Rome. Labienus was shocked. Let's not forget that up until this moment, Labienus's achievements in Gaul had been truly remarkable. He had spent the last 10 years leading semi-independent military operations in Caesar's name. Labienus was the only man Caesar trusted to take command of the Republic's largest army in his absence. In fact, I would argue that Labienus deserves half the credit for the conquest of Gaul.
Damn.
Unlike Caesar, Labienus actually lived on deployment with the legions. And unlike Caesar, Labienus's military record was an unbroken string of victories.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much I exactly agree with that. I don't know if he's giving too much credit to Labienus, but it is true that whenever Caesar has to go back to the established provinces or go back for any political business, who stays behind to make sure things are okay? Labienus. He's always in the trenches. He's always there. You know, he's involved. So, I mean, I do think that is true. He definitely deserves a share of the credit for the conquest of Gaul. And he definitely deserves some respect for always being there, always being the one to be left behind to keep charge of things while Caesar is gone. Labienus is a man who's definitely made a name for himself, who's made a career, but that career has been, so far, completely under Caesar. I mean, he's closely tied to Caesar as a subordinate, a friend, I'm sure, and also, you know, as someone who's moving up in the world. His upwards movement so far has been tied to the upward movement of Caesar.
Without any exaggeration, Labienus was up there with Pompey and Caesar as one of Rome's greatest living generals.
Wow.
And this fact may have caused some animosity. Had Labienus devoted the last 10 years to his own advancement rather than Caesar's, he would have been one of the most influential men in Rome. Now, Labienus was over 50, and if he was ever going to translate his military success into political power, it was going to be as one of Caesar's men.
Yup.
Caesar noticed this shift in attitude. As time went on, he granted Labienus more and more independence, and gave every indication that the Gallic provinces would be his whenever Caesar returned to Rome.
And I mean, this is what often happens with a trusted subordinate. You know, your right-hand man. Over time, if it's someone as talented as Labienus, they're going to start to get ideas on their own, you know, that they want some sort of independent success. Now, ideally, that will come from their existing patron, so Labienus getting a governorship from Caesar. But if that doesn't happen, sometimes these subordinates, if they are, you know, willing to, will branch out on their own, go in a different direction, maybe come into conflict with their former patron.
Finally, Labienus would get an independent command. Some whispered that the consulship might follow. But then, Caesar rose up in open rebellion against the Senate and people of Rome. From what we can tell, he didn't even bother to consult with Labienus before doing so.
Ooh.
Labienus was angry. I would have been angry too. Labienus had hitched his wagon to Caesar, and
I mean, yeah, imagine that. You know, you're someone who's been working for years under Caesar, your career is tied to his, your success is tied to his, and you're hoping, you probably believe that very soon this is going to lead to some impressive political or military positions. And now Caesar has gone and done something which probably seems absolutely crazy to you. You weren't consulted on this, you don't necessarily want this to happen. You know, you just want to, you know, have your career. You know, whether you're loyal to the Republic for whatever reason, you did not see this coming, and this is not at all what you bargained for.
And now Caesar had decided to foolishly run off a cliff. And it wasn't all about ambition. If we are to believe Labienus's surviving words, which in fairness come to us through biased sources, he considered taking up arms against the Senate morally repugnant. Absent any data to the contrary, I see no reason not to believe him. This was the most important decision of his life, and taking his reasoning behind it seriously is the least we can do.
I mean, yeah, whether he was morally against a decision to take up arms against the Republic, he definitely would have been personally against it. I mean, this is a decision which probably seemed crazy to him, and probably seemed very much against his interests.
Without too much fuss, Labienus immediately left camp, accompanied by a large contingent of cavalry that were personally loyal to him. He made no attempt to bring along any of Caesar's legions. Once free, Labienus publicly denounced Caesar as a traitor and pledged his loyalty to the Senate. He would join up with the Pompeians in Italy. This was an unexpected blow to Caesar.
Yeah, I mean, I knew this was the way it was going to go. I'm somewhat familiar with this story, but I'm surprised it was so instantaneous. I mean, there was, as far as I can tell, there wasn't really a discussion with Caesar. There doesn't even seem to have been that much thinking on Labienus's behalf. He saw what happened, and instantly he just dropped Caesar. He was done with him. Maybe there was a bit of resentment brewing in the background because, you know, like Historia Civilis mentioned, Labienus had labored for years to boost Caesar's career. You know, maybe he also felt like, you know what, this is my chance to do something on my own, or Caesar hasn't given me any opportunities so far, why should I stick with him? Or maybe it was true loyalty to the Republic. Whatever it was, it seems like Labienus heard and was pretty much instantly out.
The two had been close friends for at least 14 years, probably longer. Labienus had earned Caesar's absolute confidence. It was a big deal. But for what it's worth, Labienus made no attempt to stab Caesar in the back by stealing his legions. He could have, but he didn't. That's worth something. Caesar ordered his men back in Gaul to pack up Labienus's personal belongings and have them shipped to Italy. Some historians have described this as a callous reaction to a loss of a friend, but I don't see it that way at all. Labienus had lived in Gaul for 10 years and then just walked away with nothing. To my eyes, it's a small act of compassion to be like, sure, follow your conscience if you must, but you're gonna need all your stuff once you get back to Italy.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could be interpreted differently, but it could also be a small act of honor or maybe a last act of friendship or compassion. You could definitely see it that way. The fact that it seems like Labienus didn't even try and take any of Caesar's legions. Maybe he felt it was not realistic. Maybe he felt it was dishonorable. And maybe it was because of his relationship with Caesar. I don't know.
When Cicero learned that Labienus had defected from Caesar, he wrote, Labienus seems to have condemned a friend of his of a crime for the sake of the Republic. Continuing, he wrote, I judge Labienus a hero. It has been a long time since a more glorious political move. If Labienus has accomplished nothing else, he has caused Caesar pain.
I mean, that last part's a little petty, but this is exactly the sort of noble sacrifice that Cicero just loved.
I would add to Cicero's thoughts. If Labienus had accomplished nothing else, he had deprived Caesar of a skilled lieutenant.
Yeah, that is
respect,
true.
He was irreplaceable.
That is very true.
When news traveled south, there was panic on the streets of Rome. The Senate was as surprised as anybody. They had been keeping a close eye on Caesar's legions north of the Alps. If these legions moved, they told themselves, that meant that Caesar was gearing up for an invasion. Well, those legions hadn't moved. Caesar invaded anyways. Now, the recriminations began. The warhawks in the Senate started pointing fingers, arguing that Pompey had walked them into this mess. It's not true, by the way. If anything, it was the other way around. The warhawks walked Pompey into this mess. There were legions mustering to the south, but they wouldn't be ready for some time, and even when they were, these raw recruits wouldn't stand much of a chance against Caesar's hardened legion. There were more experienced legions in Spain and Greece, but it would take months to get them over to Italy. In the defense of the Pompeians, it was winter, and they had assumed that they would have months to get ready. They were just wrong. In Rome, those who could packed up their belongings and fled the city. When Cicero learned that Caesar's march south was creating a steady stream of Roman refugees, he remarked, "Are we talking about a Roman general here, or Hannibal?"
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty remarkable event. You have a Roman general marching on the city, and of course that would cause a lot of finger pointing in the Senate. I mean, we've seen the political tension building anyhow, and now you have a situation where we're basically, we're walking towards a civil war, and so against, you're not fighting against a foreign enemy, you're fighting against your own people. And so there's going to be some split allegiances here and there. There are going to be people who feel very strongly against this, some people who are on Caesar's side. Caesar has some supporters, and then some people more in the middle. It's a really fascinating position to be in, and it's, I think a lot more complex than, say, a Hannibal situation, though that was very bad for the Romans as well.
Pompey could see no way around it. He would not be able to mobilize a resistance in time. He would have to temporarily abandon the city of Rome.
Damn.
His reasoning was sound. He had access to the vast resources of Rome's provinces. He had more legions. He had more money. He had the Senate on his side.
That is true. I mean, it is the strategically intelligent move, but, it's easy to see that leaving Rome behind, even temporarily, is a pretty big loss. It's a big PR loss. It's a big symbolic loss. I mean, it's a big deal, even if it is the strategically intelligent move to make.
The longer this conflict continued, the stronger Pompey would become. Caesar's only hope was to force an early confrontation. By pulling back, Pompey denied Caesar this opportunity. It was the right call under the circumstances.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it was popular.
Exactly.
Being forced to abandon the capital isn't a great way to start a war.
Nope.
Rome's most prominent senators violently disagreed with the decision. Cicero was particularly upset. He asked Pompey, whom he had been privately calling the Senate's incompetent leader, if he intended to make a stand in southern Italy. Pompey wouldn't give him a straight answer. Cicero reluctantly agreed to obey the Senate's order, but decided not to go with Pompey. He would remain in the Italian countryside, ready to return to Rome at a moment's notice.
And that was also Cicero's power base, to be clear, so it was kind of going back to a region that he was comfortable with. It is also a very Cicero thing to do. I mean, he's with the Pompeians. He's definitely not with Caesar, but he does kind of have to go his own way. He can't completely go with them. Yeah, I think it's the strategically right decision to leave the city behind for the moment, unless you want to be instantly defeated by Caesar. But, this would be a very unpopular decision with the Senate and the public. You're just going to let our capital city be captured? Rome? This is the most important city in our empire, and you're just going to lose it instantly. Yeah, it doesn't sound good.
The young senator Marcus Junius Brutus was also quite torn. On paper, it should have been a no-brainer, since his beloved uncle was none other than the arch-conservative Cato. But it was more complicated than that. Brutus's mother was Caesar's longtime mistress, and the two men seemed genuinely affectionate towards each other.
Yeah.
Plus, there was an additional wrinkle. When Brutus was a child, Pompey had personally ordered the death of his father. The hatred ran deep. To this day, Brutus could barely bring himself to speak to the man.
Yeah, this is sort of some of the complexities of Roman politics, particularly patrician politics, because mainly due to the family ties. You can see how those elite politics, particularly very insular elite politics, such as patrician Roman politics, they would have been very much concerned with bloodlines, family ties, who is related to who. So you get a situation where political decisions are related to these, intense personal decisions. Personal grudges, personal connections, friendships. That's still true today, even in political cultures that are a little less insular. But particularly in something like this, a situation like this, that would have been important.
After an intense period of soul-searching, Brutus decided that the Republic's integrity was more important than his personal feelings.
Wow.
He pledged his loyalty to his father's killer and accompanied Pompey into southern Italy.
It's a principled stand.
Domitius Ahenobarbus, another powerful senator, was angry. Domitius was the guy who had been selected by the Senate to replace Caesar in Gaul whenever he resigned his command. Now, Domitius was one of the many who were furious at Pompey's decision to abandon the capital.
Yeah.
Without bothering to consult with Pompey or the rest of the Senate, Domitius grabbed 10,000 militiamen and raw recruits and marched north. He would stop Caesar's advance or die trying.
Okay, interesting.
This was not as crazy as it might seem. Against Caesar's one half-strength legion, Domitius would have outnumbered him 4-1.
That's true, but he's facing a far superior general, I assume. I don't imagine Domitius would measure up to Caesar even a little bit. Plus, he is facing, sure, a force that is far smaller, but one that is far superior, far better trained, experienced. These are hardened veterans. But I guess for someone who had a lot to lose and a lot to gain, I can see why he would do this. I think it's a rash decision. I would certainly not take the same course of action, but he's probably thinking, I don't want to lose what I have, and if I manage to defeat Caesar here, I'm a hero. I am the savior of the Republic. I guess we'll see how Domitius does.
However, things had changed in the last few weeks. As soon as he crossed the Rubicon, Caesar split up his tiny legion and captured 5 cities in rapid succession, all uncontested. One of these detachments was led by Mark Antony, who I would like to note was still technically a tribune of the plebs. Tribunes were forbidden to leave Rome while in office, and not only had Antony left the city, but here he was returning at the head of a rebel army. Things were so chaotic at this time that it never even occurred to anybody to strip him of office. But they should have.
Yeah, sure, but I think protocol was sort of being left in the dust with the desperate crisis that they were facing. It's also interesting that Caesar would immediately claim a couple of cities. It shows, we know this at this point, but it shows that he's not just making some sort of political power play or trying to make a point. He's playing for keeps. He is actually trying to march and conquer Rome and its territories.
Now that Caesar had a foothold in Italy, he ordered his legions north of the Alps to join him. He spent the rest of January capturing cities in the north. Apart
Ooh.
from one tiny skirmish, all of the defending garrisons either fled or defected to his side.
So Caesar's gonna be a lot better prepared than Domitius expects.
With reinforcements coming down from the north and defectors coming up from the south, Caesar's one legion ballooned into 5 or 6.
Oh my god.
By early February, Domitius
no.
Ahenobarbus arrived at the town of Corfinium with 10,000 men, which equaled like 2 legions.
Oh
Caesar
no.
would have to pass this way before heading further south. Domitius knew that for him, this was probably a one-way trip. But if everything went well, it would give Pompey enough time to marshal his resources and march north, intercepting Caesar before he reached Rome. When Caesar's legions showed up outside the walls of Corfinium, the civilians inside the town immediately lost heart and tried to surrender. Besieged, and with no sign of support from Pompey, Domitius's 10,000 recruits and militiamen realized that this was a suicide mission.
Yeah.
They mutinied against their commander.
Wow. 1, wow. 2, kind of fair enough. I mean, there are far more Caesarians than you expected. You're not seeing any support from Pompey. Not to mention, and I brought this up earlier, you're not surrendering to some foreign enemy. You're surrendering to Caesar. He's a Roman. You'll probably be okay. I can definitely understand why they would say, we're not going to fight this guy. We're just going to surrender.
Opened the gates of the town and hauled Domitius before Caesar. Domitius was humiliated. He begged for death, believing that the execution of a former consul would serve as a rallying cry for the rest of Italy.
Damn.
Instead, Caesar surprised everybody by publicly pardoning Domitius and letting him walk away a free man.
I think this is smart, because you gotta remember, I just brought this up, but Caesar is conquering Rome. This is his home territory. What he wants to do is take over. So it's probably best that he can reduce his amount of enemies, because at some point he'll have to govern. And he'd rather govern a, more friendly populace instead of a hostile one. So if he can show that he's magnanimous, he's generous, he's willing to forgive, that's probably going to help him down the line. And in fact, that's probably going to prevent further resistance, because if Caesar approaches cities and they're afraid he's going to massacre them, they're more likely to resist. But if they think, well, he pardoned Domitius, he was amenable to the men that Domitius brought, if we surrender, maybe he'll give us good treatment too. So I think in this situation, this is the sort of the smart way to play it. And we've seen Caesar being brutal. I mean, in Gaul, he behaved very brutally. A lot of massacres, prisoner taking, burning down towns. So he knows how to do that. But I would agree, I think, with what he's doing here. That is not the way to go when you're trying to retake Rome.
Caesar justifies his clemency by saying that he had no interest in alienating politicians or the public with unnecessary brutality. If he was victorious, he wanted his victory to last, and to do that, he would need the cooperation of his former enemies.
Smart.
That's the reason he gave. The real reason might be a little less high-minded.
Okay, interesting. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking, but apparently maybe Caesar had some ulterior motives.
When Domitius's 10,000 men discovered that Caesar had pardoned their former commander, many broke ranks and volunteered to join Caesar's legions. Now Domitius was angrier than ever. He immediately began planning a...
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of in the same cause, right? I mean, Caesar's saying he doesn't want to alienate the people or the politicians. Part of that is picking up support along the way. That means picking up extra troops, So I don't think that's kind of in line with what he said.
A second high-risk operation to save the Republic.
Really?
He'd be back.
Okay, interesting. I kind of thought that he would just give up after that. His life has been saved. He's been very lucky. I kind of expected him to just walk away with his tail between his legs, or maybe even join Caesar, but apparently Domitius isn't done yet.
By now, Caesar had approximately 6 legions in Italy, while Pompey was still struggling to rally 2 or 3 legions in the south. Pompey began to seriously consider abandoning the Italian peninsula.
Yeah.
The Pompeians still held the overall advantage, even though locally they were outnumbered. In time, the combined strength of the provinces would surely be enough to overpower Caesar's rebellion.
Surely.
With his mind made up, Pompey...
But, I mean, you say surely, but if Caesar can get enough of an upper hand here, I mean, he'll have a much better chance at taking on the other provinces, particularly if you consider, I mean, Pompey's troops are separated by a wide area. Caesar can conquer the Italian peninsula and manage to take them on one at a time, or effectively divide his forces. I feel like Caesar's chances are rising as time goes on.
He began to evacuate his army from southern Italy.
I mean, this is, I think, still the right move from Pompey, because he really doesn't stand a chance at this point of preventing Caesar from conquering Rome and conquering the Italian peninsula. So I think it's still correct that he flees to the provinces, but I'm just saying it's not looking as good for Pompey as you might have expected.
Pompey marched his legions to the port city of Brundisium to make the crossing to Greece. It didn't take long for Caesar to figure out where he was going. He abandoned all of his previous plans and made a beeline for southern Italy. By the time Caesar arrived, Pompey had occupied Brundisium, and half of his army had already sailed away. Caesar besieged the city, but a siege wouldn't do any good once Pompey's ships returned. He ordered a small fleet built and used them to haul dirt and rocks and wood out into the harbor. They used the material to begin building a barrier or a breakwater to prevent the Pompeians from escaping. Pompey couldn't let this happen. He responded by sending out ships of his own to slow down the construction. There was skirmishing back and forth for several days, and before Caesar could complete his breakwater, the Pompeian fleet returned.
I mean, once again, we can see that Caesar is clearly playing for keeps. You know, he has, for the moment, bypassed Rome, which, if he was trying to make some big political point, he would have taken, and he's going straight for Pompey and his army. Caesar wants to end this conflict before it begins. He's serious. I mean, and at this point, it's obvious that he's serious, but, I mean, this just shows where his mind is.
Pompey and the rest of his supporters set sail for Greece. They would live to fight another day.
Yes, they would.
This was a missed opportunity for Caesar, but nevertheless, the Pompeian flight meant that Italy was now firmly under his control.
Yeah.
It had been approximately 2 months since Caesar crossed the Rubicon. He was now finally free to enter Rome. The reception was not what he expected. The place was a ghost town. Those who could had fled the city. Those who couldn't opted to stay indoors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair enough. I'm not sure why Caesar would have expected anything else. I mean, he was a relatively popular figure, but, you know, this is an extreme action that he's taken. Of course, people would be terrified. Everyone who has the means to leave has left. So, I mean, this is exactly what I would have expected. You know, even if Caesar was a popular guy, most people ain't going to be coming out of their homes cheering for him when he arrives. They're scared. I mean, they're worried what's going to happen next. They don't know. I mean, this is pretty unprecedented. The Senate has fled. The Republic seems to be crumbling at the core. What's going to happen?
After all, Caesar was a traitor, an enemy of the Republic, and people had good reason to expect a bloodbath.
Yeah.
But Caesar wasn't here for blood. He needed something else. Upon entering the city, he immediately called for a meeting of the Senate. Rome's best and brightest had gone with Pompey, but there were a few senators still in the city. Caesar told this little makeshift Senate that he wanted access to Rome's treasury. He was desperate. He was already paying his legions with IOUs, and he would need to continue paying them for at least another year, now that Pompey had escaped to Greece. Caesar gave some BS justification for this request, saying that since Rome no longer had to worry about fighting the Gauls, the money previously spent on that should go to him instead.
Yeah, okay.
His reasoning didn't make any sense, but it didn't need to. None of the senators objected.
Yeah, this is how Caesar will continue to operate throughout his career. He will try and put on this facade of normalcy, of, the Republic's still alive, the Senate's still here, everything's still functioning as it should. In reality, everything comes back to Caesar. Caesar's in charge. When we get to Augustus, that's when the curtain really falls, and it's like, okay, so we basically have an emperor at this point. Caesar still tries to pretend that some of our traditional institutions have some serious influence, and they have some influence, but Caesar is in control at this point. He's in charge, and everybody basically knows it.
In fact, none of the senators said anything. Caesar decided to interpret their silence as approval, which was not how voting worked, but whatever.
Nope.
Then, one of the few remaining tribunes of the plebs, a guy named Metellus, summoned his courage and vetoed Caesar's request.
Damn.
Caesar stormed out of the Senate House. He ordered his legionaries to occupy the Forum and led a group of soldiers up to the Temple of Saturn.
Oh no. I don't like where this is going. I mean, Caesar wants to make as many allies as possible, and, a bloodbath would be a bad look. But Caesar also, wants to get what he needs, so I'm a little worried about what's going to happen here.
Saturn, which housed the Roman treasury. When he got there, the temple was locked and boarded up. Metellus stood before the entrance, blocking Caesar's path and continuing to exercise his veto.
I mean, Metellus, I respect the principled stance that you are currently taking. I worry it's going to get you killed. Also, at this point, there's not much you can really do, but I do respect what you're doing, my friend.
Caesar approached Metellus and told him that if he didn't get out of the way, he would order his men to murder him right there before the gods and everyone. After a beat, Metellus decided to step aside. Caesar proceeded.
Yeah, I mean, look, I respected Metellus's principled stand, but to be honest, him giving his life there probably would not have contributed much to the anti-Caesar cause. I mean, Caesar was going to get into the treasury regardless of whether Metellus lived or died. So I do respect him standing up, but, I mean, I definitely would have also stepped aside at that moment.
To plunder the Republic's treasury, and immediately began to settle up on his IOUs. Up until this incident, Caesar had consistently argued that he was on the right side of the law. By coming into Rome and threatening to murder public officials, he demonstrated how untrue that was. The rule of law was dead. Rome was in the hands of a conquering warlord.
And to be fair, we already knew that. I mean, this is just Caesar being really obvious about that, but it was already very clear that any pretense of legality that Caesar put forward was basically completely illegitimate at this point.
Even though Caesar controlled Italy, he was still beset with enemies on all sides, which meant that he had an important decision to make. Pompey was in Greece with 2 or 3 legions, and was already rallying the combined strength of the East to his banner. Pompey also had 7 legions active in Spain, which were continuing to operate independently. Caesar joked that to his west there was an army without a general, and to his east there was a general without an army. He could only deal with one of these threats at a time, but which would it be, east or west? After some deliberation, Caesar decided to head west to deal with Spain first. Here was his reasoning. At this moment, Pompey was in no position to attack. If Caesar spent a year campaigning in Spain, Italy would be relatively safe. The opposite was not true. If Caesar spent a year campaigning in Greece, Italy would probably fall to the Spanish legions.
I mean, there's risks either way. I can see what he's arguing. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, he leaves Italy completely vulnerable to attack from the west. But by going for the Spanish legions, he gives Pompey a lot more time to prepare, get ready, and perhaps if he's quick enough, launch an attack on his own initiative. So, there's risks either way, but this is what happens when you are outnumbered and surrounded by your enemies. Whatever you do, it's going to be a very risky move.
Spain was the immediate threat. Greece was the future threat. The immediate threat had to be dealt with first. This must have been an agonizing decision.
Yeah.
Caesar understood that Pompey would become more and more powerful as the war dragged on. In his absence, Caesar would leave behind Mark Antony as the informal governor of Italy.
And we saw in this series the emergence of Mark Antony and how he initially gained some of Caesar's trust by his impressive performance in the Gallic Wars. And as it's gone on, we've sort of seen him take on more important roles. And I think now we're really getting to the beginning of Mark Antony as one of the most important people in Caesar's retinue.
Had things gone differently, this would have been Labienus's job.
Definitely.
He was with the Pompeians now, and Caesar needed a new number two that he could rely on.
Yep.
For the moment, Antony was that man. Although, as we'll discover, good help is hard to find, and Antony was no Labienus.
Yeah. Antony was no Labienus, but he will stick around for a long time.
Caesar prepared to split his army. He sent 3 legions to capture Sicily, with orders to continue on to Africa if they were successful. He sent another legion to capture Sardinia, which was close enough to Italy that they could return if something went wrong. Both of these expeditions would require naval support, which meant that Caesar would travel to Spain with his remaining 3 legions on foot. Finally, he sent orders to his 6 remaining legions in Gaul, instructing them to break camp and get themselves to Spain as quickly as possible.
Yep.
They would beat him there, but that was fine because time was of the essence. Every day Caesar spent in Spain, Pompey would be gathering strength in Greece.
Oh, yeah. All right. That was a good one. Yeah, that was very interesting. We're at a very fascinating point in Roman history. We have, basically gotten to the beginning of the Civil War. So in these next videos, we're going to see those battles, that war play out, and we're going to see, Caesar's rule over Rome. I'm really fascinated to get there. I think this is some really interesting stuff. If you guys enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon, which is linked down below. Leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.